If you're listening to this during a storm, maybe keep a light on. There's something unsettling about rainy nights. The sound of water hitting the windows, the empty streets, the way every shadow in your house suddenly feels alive once the world outside goes quiet. Maybe that's why some of the creepiest things people experience happen during storms, when nobody wants to go outside, and nobody would hear you if you screamed. Tonight's stories aren't about ghosts or monsters hiding under the bed. They're about real people, real situations, and the terrifying moments when ordinary nights turned into something unforgettable. A man notices the same mysterious car parked outside his house every night, until he discovers someone may have already been inside. An Uber driver picks up a passenger during a violent storm in the middle of nowhere, and realizes too late that something about the man in his back seat is deeply wrong. And a woman spending a rainy evening alone in her rural home slowly begins to understand that the strange noises around her aren't coming from the storm outside. So lock your doors, turn the volume up, and settle in, because these are 3 true scary stories for a rainy night alone. This happened only a few months ago, and honestly, I still catch myself thinking about it whenever I come home late at night. I work overnight shifts at a warehouse outside my town. Because of that, my entire schedule is backwards. I usually sleep during the day and stay awake all night, even on my days off, just so my body doesn't get completely destroyed trying to switch schedules all the time. Most nights I get home somewhere around 4 in the morning. That particular week had been miserable weather-wise. It rained almost non-stop for days. Not heavy thunderstorms the whole time, just that constant cold rain that makes everything feel darker and emptier than usual. The roads were completely dead when I got off work that night. No headlights, no people, just wet pavement reflecting the orange glow from streetlights. I remember pulling into my neighborhood around 4:15 a.m. and immediately noticing a car parked near the entrance to my driveway. It was an older black sedan with dark tinted windows, the kind where you can't see inside even if you try. Every light on it was off. At first I didn't think much about it. My neighborhood has a decent amount of space between houses, so it wasn't uncommon for people visiting someone nearby to park along the street. Still, something about the placement felt weird. There were dozens of open spots farther down the road, yet this car was parked directly beside my driveway. As I slowly passed it, I tried glancing through the windows, but all I saw was my own headlights reflecting back at me. I parked in my garage, sat there for a second, then looked back down the driveway through the rain-speckled windshield. The car never moved. I eventually shrugged it off and went inside. About an hour later, before going to sleep, I checked through the front window one more time. The car was gone. That should have been the end of it. The next evening, I woke up around 6, got dressed, grabbed coffee, and headed back to work. The car wasn't there anymore, so I completely forgot about the whole thing. My shift dragged on forever that night. By the time I got off, rain was hammering against the warehouse roof so hard you could barely hear people talking. I was exhausted and honestly just wanted to get home and sleep. But when I turned onto my street again, the exact same black sedan was parked in the exact same spot. Same tinted windows, same lights off, same angle facing the road. I slowed down this time. Something about seeing it there again made my stomach tighten a little. I drove past it slowly enough that if someone had been inside, they definitely would have known I was looking. But once again, I couldn't see a thing through the windows. I parked in the garage and sat there debating whether I was overreacting. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I got out and walked down the driveway toward the street. Rain dripped from the trees overhead while I moved closer to the car. The neighborhood was dead silent except for distant thunder and water running through storm drains. About 10 feet away, I thought I saw movement behind the driver's side window, just for a split second, like someone shifting in their seat. I froze immediately, but after staring at the window for several more seconds, nothing else moved. Maybe it was just a reflection from the rain. Maybe my tired brain was creating things that weren't there. Still, I didn't want to walk right up beside it. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the license plate, just in case. Then, I went back inside and locked the door. Same as the previous night, the car disappeared sometime before sunrise. Now at this point, I knew it was strange. But technically, the car hadn't done anything. Nobody approached me. Nobody knocked on the door. Nothing was stolen. So what exactly was I supposed to tell the police? That a car was legally parked outside my house? I tried convincing myself it was probably someone visiting nearby who just happened to work night shifts too. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The third night was when things stopped feeling normal. I had the following night off work, so after waking up around sunset, I decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood like I usually did. Rain had finally slowed to a drizzle, and I needed to clear my head. When I left the house, the black sedan wasn't there. I walked for about an hour, and during that entire walk, I maybe saw 2 other parked cars in the whole neighborhood. That's why the second I turned back onto my street and saw that black sedan parked beside my driveway again, I felt genuine fear for the first time, because it hadn't been there before, which meant whoever owned it had arrived while I was out walking. I stood there staring at it from the sidewalk while rain lightly tapped against my hood. Then I slowly walked closer. This time I went right up beside the driver's side window and pressed my hands against the glass to block out reflections. The car was empty. No driver, no passenger, nothing inside except a few fast food wrappers on the floor and an empty water bottle in the cup holder. That somehow made it worse, because if nobody was in the car, then where were they? I quickly went back inside and locked the door behind me. The moment I grabbed my phone off the charger, I noticed a notification from my security camera app. Motion detected. The alert had been triggered only a few minutes earlier. For context, I had 1 camera on my front porch and several small cameras inside the house facing the main rooms, mostly because I lived alone and liked having extra security since my work schedule was weird. I opened the app expecting to see maybe headlights outside or rain triggering false movement. Instead, I saw a saved 60-second clip from the upstairs hallway camera. At first, nothing happened. The hallway was completely empty, no movement, no sound. I honestly thought the app had glitched. Then during the final few seconds of the video, someone moved across the bottom of the frame. Fast. So fast I almost missed it. Just the top of a head and part of a shoulder rushing past the camera. Inside my house, my entire body went cold instantly. I replayed the clip 3 times trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But it was. Someone had been upstairs. And the worst part? That hallway camera was located directly outside my bedroom. I remember slowly lowering the phone and looking around my room while my heart pounded so hard it physically hurt. The silence in the house suddenly felt unbearable. Every tiny creak sounded massive. Every shadow looked wrong. Then I heard something move behind me. This happened about 4 years ago, back when I was driving for Uber almost every night to help pay my college bills. I actually preferred driving during bad weather. Most drivers stayed home when storms rolled in, which meant less competition and better payouts for the few people still working. Some nights I'd barely get any rides at all, but when I did, they usually paid well enough to make sitting around worth it. That night was one of the worst storms I'd seen in a long time. Rain hammered against the windshield nonstop, and the wind was strong enough to shake my car every few minutes. The streets were almost completely empty. For the first couple hours, I mostly sat in a grocery store parking lot watching videos on my phone and waiting for rides to pop up. Nothing came through. Eventually, I drove to a fast food place, grabbed food, then went back to waiting. Around midnight, I started thinking about calling it a night. I was parked near a gas station scrolling through my phone when finally a ride request appeared. At first glance, it looked amazing. The pickup location was about 25 minutes away, and the drop-off was another 20 minutes past that. The payout was huge compared to normal rides. Usually when something like that happened, it meant there weren't any other Uber drivers nearby willing to work during the storm. I accepted it immediately. The GPS started taking me farther and farther out of town. Eventually, streetlights disappeared completely. The roads became narrow 2-lane highways surrounded by woods and empty fields. Rain blurred everything beyond my headlights. The longer I drove, the stranger it felt. There was absolutely nothing out there. No houses, no stores, no traffic, just endless darkness and rain. At one point, I actually checked the app again to make sure I hadn't entered the wrong coordinates somehow. But no, the pickup point was exactly where the app said it would be. After about 35 minutes, I finally arrived. The pin location was at the corner of 2 empty roads in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't a single building nearby, no gas station, no house, nothing. I slowed to a stop and looked around in confusion while rain pounded the roof of the car. "Your rider is nearby," the app said. Nearby where? I clicked the arrived button and waited. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then suddenly I saw movement in my side mirror. A figure was walking toward my car through the rain. I jumped a little because I genuinely had no idea where he'd come from. 1 second, there was nobody there, and the next this guy was approaching through the darkness like he'd appeared out of nowhere. He opened the back door and climbed inside without saying a word. The smell of wet clothes and rain filled the car immediately. I glanced at him through the mirror. He looked to be maybe mid-30s, completely soaked, with messy dark hair hanging over his face. Water dripped from his jacket onto the seat. But what really bothered me was his expression. He looked furious. Not angry at me specifically, just wrong, like he'd been sitting out there in the storm thinking about something terrible. "You order the Uber?" I asked nervously. Instead of answering normally, he just said my first name. Hearing him say it like that made me uncomfortable instantly. Technically, passengers can see your name through the app, so it wasn't strange logically, but something about the way he said it felt personal. I started driving. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. He sat directly in the center of the back seat instead of behind one of the front seats like most passengers do. Every time I looked in the mirror, he was staring straight ahead at me, not blinking much, not moving, just watching. Outside, rain crashed against the windshield so hard that visibility kept disappearing every few seconds. The GPS continued guiding us deeper into isolated back roads. Eventually, I tried making conversation, mostly to calm my nerves. "So, rough night to be out here," I said with a forced laugh. No response. I glanced in the mirror again. He was still staring. I tried again. "What were you even doing all the way out there?" This time his eyes shifted toward mine in the mirror for maybe 1 second. Then he looked away again without answering. That silence felt way worse than if he'd just told me to shut up. At that point, my instincts were screaming at me that something wasn't right. I started paying closer attention to everything he was doing. He kept glancing around the car, at the windows, at my phone mounted beside the steering wheel, at the road behind us. Then after several more minutes, he suddenly spoke. "Pull over." His voice was low and flat. I looked around. We were in the middle of nowhere again, just woods on both sides of the road with rain pouring down so heavily it almost looked like fog. "Here?" I asked. "Now," he said sharply. I immediately slowed the car and pulled onto the shoulder. The second I stopped, the atmosphere inside the car changed completely. I can't explain it any better than that. It felt like something invisible snapped tight. The man reached for the door handle, but then paused. His eyes drifted toward my phone, specifically toward the Uber app still open on the screen, and in that exact moment, I saw realization hit him. The app had his information, his ride history, his name, a direct connection tying him to me. I watched his expression change almost instantly, like he'd suddenly remembered something important. He slowly pulled out his own phone and stared at it for several seconds while rain roared outside the windows. And honestly, that was the moment I became convinced he'd planned something horrible. I don't know what exactly. Robbery, carjacking, maybe worse. But I genuinely think he changed his mind after seeing the app on my dashboard, because now there'd be evidence linking him directly to me. Trying to sound calm, I quickly said, "Hey, don't worry about the ride. I'll cancel it on my end so you won't get charged." I wasn't actually trying to help him. I just wanted him out of my car. He looked at me through the mirror with this dead expression that I still remember perfectly. Then, without another word, he opened the door and stepped out into the storm. Within seconds, rain and darkness swallowed him completely. I didn't wait. The second the door shut, I hit the gas and sped away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely steer. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting headlights to appear behind me. Nothing did. When I finally made it back to town, I pulled into a gas station parking lot just to calm down. Part of me felt stupid. Maybe the guy was harmless. Maybe he was just socially awkward or drunk. But another part of me knew deep down that something was seriously wrong about that situation. So I reported the ride to Uber and also contacted the police non-emergency line. I told them the entire story, even though I admitted I didn't technically have proof of anything criminal. The officer basically agreed it sounded suspicious, but said there wasn't much they could do unless something actually happened. A few days later, I got a phone call. A detective asked if I could come in and answer more questions about the passenger. Apparently someone had gone missing that same night. Last seen near the area where I picked him up, The police never outright told me they believed the man from my car was responsible. But they didn't have to. I could hear it in the questions they asked. They wanted every detail about him. What he looked like, how he spoke, whether he mentioned names or locations, whether I noticed blood, injuries, anything unusual. Unfortunately, I didn't have much to give them. And because of the storm, almost any physical evidence outside had been washed away by morning. They never found the missing person, and they never identified the man from my back seat. To this day, I still think about one specific thing. If he really had planned to hurt me that night, then the only reason I'm still alive might be because he noticed the Uber app before getting out of the car. This happened during one of the rainiest weeks I can remember. I live in a rural area outside town where the houses are spread far apart and surrounded by woods. During storms, it gets unbelievably dark out there. No street lights, no traffic, just trees, mud, and rain pounding against everything. At the time, I worked a job that was half indoors and half outside, so bad weather made every shift miserable. That day had completely drained me. By the time I got home around 6 in the evening, I was soaked, exhausted, and ready to do absolutely nothing for the rest of the night. Rain hammered against my windshield the entire drive home. When I finally turned onto my dirt driveway, I noticed something strange immediately. Fresh tire tracks. Another vehicle had clearly driven down my driveway recently. Normally that wouldn't have mattered much, except the tracks went all the way down to my house, then turned around and left. No package, no mail, nothing at the front door. At first I assumed someone had just accidentally turned into the wrong driveway during the storm. Still, it stuck with me for some reason. I parked, went inside, changed out of my wet clothes, and started making dinner while listening to rain slam against the windows. For a while, everything felt normal. I ate, watched TV, scrolled on my phone. Around 7:30, I thought I heard a knock at the front door. Just one knock, soft enough that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. The storm outside was loud enough that random noises blended together constantly. But after another minute passed, curiosity got the better of me. I walked across the house and opened the front door. Rain and wind exploded into the entryway immediately, but nobody was there. No car lights, no footsteps. Nothing except darkness and rain. I stood there for several seconds looking around before finally shutting the door again. I remember laughing nervously to myself afterward. Living alone in a rural house kind of trains your brain to scare itself sometimes. At least that's what I told myself. I went back to the couch and kept watching TV. An hour or so later, I got up to use the bathroom. As I walked through the living room, something caught my eye near the floor behind the couch. A muddy footprint, not a full clear shoe print, more like part of one. Just enough mud smeared onto the white tile to immediately stand out. I stopped dead. I knew it wasn't mine. I never wore shoes inside, especially not after walking through mud and rain all day. What bothered me even more was that the footprint was behind the couch, somewhere I definitely would have noticed earlier. I crouched down staring at it while my stomach slowly tightened. Then my brain started doing what brains do in situations like that, trying to explain it away. Maybe I tracked it accidentally earlier. Maybe it had been there already. Maybe I was just exhausted. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I cleaned it up and went to the bathroom, but after that, the entire atmosphere of the house felt different. The silence started bothering me. Every room behind me felt occupied somehow. I kept catching myself glancing over my shoulder while sitting on the couch. Eventually, I got so uncomfortable that I shut the TV off and went upstairs to my bedroom. At least up there, I felt more secure. My bed was against the wall, and from that angle, I could see the entire room clearly. I turned on my small bedroom TV and tried distracting myself. For maybe 20 minutes, it worked. Then I heard something outside my bedroom door. A dull sound, like a footstep, or maybe someone lightly bumping the wall. I froze instantly. The sound was subtle, but it was absolutely real. I muted the TV and listened carefully. Nothing. For nearly a full minute, the hallway outside stayed completely silent. I told myself I was being paranoid. The house creaked all the time during storms. But even while thinking that, I slowly got out of bed and walked toward the door. I pressed my ear against it. Still nothing. Finally, I worked up the nerve to open it. The hallway was empty, dark, quiet. I stood there staring into the shadows while rain rattled against the windows downstairs. If I wanted peace of mind, I knew I had to check the rest of the house, so I stepped into the hallway. The only other room upstairs was a spare room I mostly used for storage and books. I started walking toward it, and then downstairs, the TV suddenly turned back on by itself, full volume. The sound exploded through the house so suddenly that I physically jumped. My heart felt like it stopped. The flashing light from the TV flickered up the staircase from below while voices echoed through the dark house. I immediately ran downstairs. Every survival instinct in my body was screaming at me that someone else was inside. I reached the living room breathing hard and looked around wildly. Nobody. The TV glowed brightly against the walls, illuminating the empty room. I walked toward it carefully, scanning every doorway and shadow. Then I shut it off manually. For several seconds, I just stood there in silence. Rain, thunder, my own breathing. That was it. At that point, I grabbed a kitchen knife. Looking back, I probably should have called the police immediately, but when you're in those situations, your brain keeps trying to convince you there's a logical explanation. Maybe the remote got pressed accidentally. Maybe the TV glitched. Maybe the muddy footprint really was mine. I started checking the downstairs rooms one by one. Kitchen, laundry room, closets. Nothing looked disturbed. Nobody was there. Eventually, I slowly headed back upstairs. And honestly, by then, I was almost convincing myself I'd overreacted, until I reached the spare room. The door was cracked slightly open. I pushed it wider and looked inside. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed something lying on the floor beside the closet. The downstairs TV remote. I swear my entire body went numb, because I knew for a fact that remote had been downstairs earlier when I turned the TV off. Someone had carried it upstairs. Someone had been standing in this room while I searched the house. I backed away instantly and nearly fell trying to run downstairs. The second I reached the front door, I sprinted outside into the rain while calling 911. Police arrived about 15 minutes later. They searched the entire property thoroughly. Eventually, they found signs of forced entry on one of the downstairs windows. The lock had been damaged badly enough that someone could have slipped inside earlier that day while I was at work. And based on the muddy marks they found in certain rooms, the intruder had likely been inside the house the entire night, watching me, moving around quietly whenever I wasn't looking. The officer told me something that still messes with me to this day. Whoever it was probably used the TV intentionally. They likely heard me walking toward the spare room upstairs and turned the TV on downstairs to distract me long enough to escape the room they were hiding in. Which means while I ran downstairs, they were probably only a few feet away from me in the dark hallway. Nothing was stolen from the house. That's honestly the part that scares me most. Because if they weren't there to rob me, then why were they there at all? I moved out less than 2 months later, and even now, whenever it rains late at night, I still catch myself checking over my shoulder whenever I hear a noise in another room. And those were 3 true scary stories for a rainy night alone. Honestly, I think storms make stories like these even worse. There's something about heavy rain and empty roads that makes ordinary situations feel terrifying. A parked car outside your house, a stranger in the back seat, a noise coming from another room. During the day, maybe you'd brush those things off. But late at night, with rain hitting the windows and nobody around for miles, everything feels different. The scariest part about these stories is that none of them involve anything supernatural. No ghosts, no monsters. Just real people finding themselves in situations that could have ended much worse than they did. So before you head to sleep tonight, maybe double check your doors and windows. And if you hear something outside during the storm, maybe don't go looking for it alone. If you enjoyed tonight's video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true scary stories every week. And if you have your own disturbing story, feel free to share it in the comments below. Stay safe, and try not to look outside the window for too long tonight.